Hey guys, this is Arch, and this is my guide on the fusion system in Kid Icarus Uprising. Kid Icarus is one of my favorite games, and I have spent countless hours completing the solo missions, playing online in light vs. dark games, and of course, fusing all the weapons in my arsenal. Right now, Kid Icarus is on its last life. Most people who've played this game, me included, have moved on to other things. You can still find people playing online, but it's rare for rooms to fill in completely. I realize most people are not going to fuse weapons anymore. The most efficient way to get desired weapons is to simply hack the game and make weapons through that method. While I don't discourage this behavior, I realize there are some who would rather push the in-game systems to their limit. My overall purpose in making this guide is to showcase the depth and mystery of the fusion system, and hope people can find entertainment in learning about the game and methods that players use to create the best weapons possible. I will be covering the basics all the way up to the limits of the system, so I hope you enjoy what you see and hopefully learn something new. Any fusion project should start with a goal in mind. The first steps require having a goal weapon, so it is important to know what makes a good weapon good. Weapons contain two main attributes, stars and modifiers, that determine the value of the weapon. Having a high value is not necessarily good, as a lot of value can be wasted. A good weapon will be efficient in min-maxing value with its attributes. For this, a weapon should specialize in either range stars or melee stars. A weapon with both melee and range stars is called a mixed weapon, and is generally considered useless. Every weapon starts at a base value of 100. You can't go lower than 100, and the highest value confirmed without hacking is 342, although 341 is the limit for most cases. Value has effects on gameplay for multiplayer modes like free-for-all and light vs. dark. For free-for-alls and 1v1s, high value will give the player who KO'd you more points. You also lose more points for dying the higher your weapon value is. In light vs. dark, your team's life bar decreases based on the value of the KO'd person's weapon. The life bar in an online random match is set to 900. For both modes, the power refresh rate upon KO is determined by value. If you have a 300 plus value weapon, almost all powers that were used will have at least one usage refresh upon KO. A 100 value weapon will have to die about 2 or 3 times to refresh powers. In single player mode, there is no downside to using a weapon with higher value as opposed to a lower one. Value is technically a bad thing, as it lowers your score and takes bigger chunks out of your team's health. But a built weapon that uses value efficiently will make the trade-off worth it. Negative mods are something that can lower value at the expense of the affected modifier. These can be useful for fitting even more positive mods or stars onto a weapon without going over a value limit. Here are some significant value benchmarks that are worth mentioning. 100 is the lowest possible value. 112 is the highest value that allows 8 KOs in a 900 health light vs. dark. 299 is the highest value that allows 3 KOs in a 900 health light vs. dark. 308 is the highest value possible if using lower value weapons. 337 is the high level fusion limit. Negative mods won't pass from the lower value weapon at this point. 341 is the highest realistic value through random weapon drops. And 342 is the highest confirmed value. Only one picture of a 342 value weapon exists. And finally 350 is the hacked weapons limit. Hacked weapons above 350 will be treated as 100 value weapons. Stars add damage to either ranged attacks or melee attacks. The more stars, the higher the damage, up to a max of 6 stars. As previously stated, you want either melee or ranged weapons, not both. Another type of weapon is a starless weapon. These weapons can be good by dumping all value into powerful mods at the expense of less damage. You have the value to run defensive and utility mods, but fusion can be a bit harder. You don't have stars as a value buffer, and getting random mods on a starless weapon is rare, especially negative mods. The mods you want on weapons will change depending on the weapon. That said, there are some mods that are almost always good and used heavily. If there were a single best mod in the game, it would be Evasion. Evasion +3 and +4 gives enough invulnerability after the end of a dodge to start another action, including additional dodges, making you invincible if you never miss a dodge. You can choose which mods you want for your weapon, but for convenience I classified what mods do into categories and listed, in my opinion, the best mods for each type. A good weapon will have all stars maxed, with good max mods that work with the weapon, and a negative mod that is not overly detrimental. A bad weapon is mixed and has random mods with scattered +1s and 2s. Before getting into the mechanics of fusion, there are some tips that will make the ride smoother and easier. Having many weapons is beneficial for the process. There is a randomness to the system, so having a large variety of weapons gives you more options and chances of successful fusion. You want to keep weapons that are exclusively ranged only, melee only, or starless. 100 value weapons can be beneficial during the earlier fusion steps, so have a few handy and buy them from the shop if they appear. I recommend grinding mixed weapons into hearts as they are useless and get in the way of the fusion process. One thing I recommend is the further separation of ranged and melee weapons by favoring all of one category. I personally star all my melee weapons and mixed weapons, since I have more ranged weapons anyways. I also recommend ordering your weapons based on value. This makes many steps of the fusion system easier to understand and navigate. There is also an exploit with saving the game that can be beneficial. The game will automatically save when you exit the fusion screen. If you stay in the fusion screen, you can fuse weapons to see if the result is a good intermediate weapon for another fusion. If you like the outcome, you can go along with the fusion. If you don't like the outcome and want your original weapons back, you eject the cartridge while still in the fusion screen. The game will not save any fusions that were made. You can fuse multiple weapon pairs and they will all return if you do not leave the fusion menu before ejecting. This is the fusion screen. It is a grid that expands outward for all your weapons, and you can fuse 2 weapons into a new weapon. You can see the value, mods, and stars of the old weapons, and the value and stars of the new weapon. The highlighted mods are the mods that will be passed onto the new weapon. The actual internal mechanics of the fusion system are still a mystery, and there's no way you can predict exactly what 2 weapons will fuse into unless you check the in-game fusion screen. So if you were to tell me 2 weapons, their value, type, stars, and mods, the only way to determine the result would be to go through the game. With that in mind, there are some things that can be predicted and other generalizations that can be made. The type of weapon can be predicted in a fusion result. When I say weapon class, I am referring to whether it is a staff, bow, etc. Weapon type refers to the unique weapon within that class, like Palutena bow, Fortune bow, etc. The weapon class in a fusion is determined by a grid. So as an example, a blade and a blade will always give a claw, and a club and a bow will always give a palm. The type is determined by the internal list of the in-game weapons. Each weapon type in a class has a number assigned to it. The numbers add together during a fusion, and the sum corresponds to the type of the resulting class. If the sum is over 12, then the game will subtract 12 from the result. An example of this process is to fuse an Aquarius blade with Centurion orbitars. Since we are fusing a blade and an orbitar, the result from the chart will be a palm. Aquarius blade has an ID of 9, and Centurion orbitars have an ID of 11. The sum of the two would equal 20, and since 20 is greater than 12, 12 is subtracted for a final ID of 8. The palm that has an ID of 8 is the ninja palm. As you can see, all Aquarius blades and all Centurion orbitars yield ninja palms. There are a couple of exceptions to the rule that I will list on the screen. So the type of weapon can be determined, but mods and stars that get passed are more of a mystery. One thing that can be determined is the max value of a fusion. When fusing 2 weapons, the game averages the 2 values and adds a number based on what that value is. The number that gets added is dependent on the value of both weapons and is based on this formula. You basically have 308 minus the average value of the pair. Then you multiply that by 2 times the average value squared, and then you divide everything by 3 and then divide again by 308 squared. Here's a graph to show how much possible value gets added to the average value. It doesn't consider fusion groups, so it's not perfect. Also, there may be a cap around 20, as fusions never seem to add 30 value. The takeaway from the graph is that fusing similar value weapons together can result in a weapon of greater value than the 2 parent weapons. The value increase gets bigger in the mid-value ranges, but drops down in the low or high value, and completely stops at 308 value. This means that you can never fuse a weapon above 308 value using weapons below 308 value. All fusions that average above 308 value will have a max potential of whatever the average value is. You can match that value, but never exceed it. High-level fusion heavily depends on randomly generated weapons from drops, as they are the only source to get high-value weapons. There is also no guarantee that your fusion result will hit the max potential value. While it is impossible to exceed that value, there is no lower bound limits for value. The fusion system will pick a combination of mods and stars that come close to the max value without exceeding it. There is one more internal part of the fusion system called fusion groups. Each unique fusion between two types of weapons will be in one of the 5 fusion groups. To determine what fusion group a pair will have, you take the true ID number of the weapon. The true ID number is the weapon's ID plus the class ID. So an Atlas club is the 4th club, and clubs are the 6th class. Because there are 5 other classes before the club, you add 5 times 12, or 60, to the ID 4, to find the true ID to be 64. All 108 weapons will have this unique tag attached to them. You can subtract the true ID of one weapon from another one, take the absolute value and divide by 5, so that you have a whole number remainder. This remainder will be a number 0 through 4, and each will correlate to a fusion group. A remainder of 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 will correspond to fusion groups 2, 4, 3, 1, and 5 respectively. Fusion groups are used to determine the max number of mods that can be passed on in a fusion. The general trend is that fusion groups 1 and 2 favor stars, 3 is balanced, and 4 and 5 favors modifiers. To be more precise, we can look at this equation. It's the fusion group plus 1 plus the average amount of positive mods on both weapons, all over 2. To illustrate why high-level fusion is done almost exclusively through groups 4 and 5, you should first understand that most high-value outlines will have 5 positive mods and 1 negative mod. If you assume that and plug in fusion group 3 into the equation, you end up with 4.5, falling short of the 5 mod result. Fusion groups 4 and 5 will be able to pass on all 5 mods. Fusion groups are not necessary to know unless you are doing high value or want a particular weapon as a result. Fusion groups are also useful for telling you exactly how a weapon fusion will occur. This will only matter with weapon cloning, since you would need multiple copies of the same weapon for the information to be useful. Basically, a fusion with 2 weapons with a particular star and mod arrangement will be in one of the fusion groups. All fusions within that fusion group will be the same if the stars and mods of the weapons are the same. To put it another way, if you fuse the same outlines of weapons together, there are 5 possible resultant weapons, and these are based on fusion groups. So the Palutena bow fused with the same outline will make a different result based on the fusion group, although in this example, group 4 and 5 yield the same result. There are some exceptions that can cause different weapons to come out from what is predicted. For this, we're going to talk about mods that can't be on weapons. One rule is that you can't have mods that do the same thing twice. So you can't have a speed mod and a running speed mod on the same weapon. Same applies with dash continuous fire and forward dash continuous fire. You can't have full health boost mods and an Imperial attack boost mod on the same weapon. Only one status inflicting mod may be on a weapon at a time, and there are other examples like this. There are also weapons that can't have certain mods on them at all. Clubs can't have any continuous fire mods on them. The Magnus Club cannot have a shot range mod on it. The Insight Staff, Rose Staff, Ancient Staff, Flintlock Staff, Bear Claws, Brawler Claws, Cancer Claws, Magnus Club, Crusher Arm, Electroshock Arm, Volcano Arm, Bomber Arm, and Taurus Arm all can't have negative shot range modifiers on them. The Artillery Claws, Jetstream Orbitars, and Boom Orbitars can't have a shot homing modifier on it. These exceptions may cause the fusion group result to create a different weapon than what was expected. The last important bit to talk about is negative mods and how they pass. You can only have one negative mod on a weapon, and the way the game passes on negative mods is different than positive mods. Negative mods will be passed based off of the value of the weapon, and they will alternate every 5 value. To determine what weapon in a pair will pass on its negative mod, you add the values of the 2 weapons together and look at the last digit. If the sum value ends in 0 through 4, then the lower value weapon's negative mod will pass on. If the sum value ends in 5 through 9, then the higher value weapon's negative mod will pass. If the weapons are the same value, then the order acquired is what determines which negative mod will pass. An older acquired weapon will be considered lower value in this scenario, and the newer acquired weapon is considered higher value for this scenario. Based on this, if both weapons have a negative mod, then the result is guaranteed to have a negative mod. There are some exceptions. The first is if the negative mod is not compatible with the weapon. Like stated before, you can't pass a negative shot homing mod on the boom orbitars. The other scenario is rare, but you can't pass a negative mod if the projected value of the weapon would drop below 100. It's rare to get a fusion like this, but it's a fail-safe so that you can't get sub 100 value weapons. Now that I covered everything known about the fusion mechanics, let's put it all together in an example. Let's fuse this samurai blade with these Pandora claws, and see what happens. Let's cover the obvious stuff first. We are fusing a blade with a claw, so the result will be a club. The ID of the samurai is 7, and the Pandora's is 12, so the club ID will be 19 minus 12, or 7, and the club with an ID of 7 is the Halo Club. The max potential value is simply the average value of the two weapons without a bonus since it's over 308. The average of 331 and 323 is 327. The result must be equal to or less than 327, so the value of 322 checks out. Next we will find what negative mod passes. The sum of the two values is 654, and we just look at the last digit of 4. Since the last digit is in the 0 to 4 range, the lower value weapon's negative mod passes. As you can see, overall defense from the Pandora claws ends up passing. Next, let's look at fusion groups. The true ID of the samurai is 7, and the Pandora claws is 36. 36 minus 7 is 29, and you factor out the multiple of 5 and get a remainder of 4. A remainder of 4 correlates to fusion group 5, and since there are 5 positive mods on both weapons, a fusion group of 5 allows for 5 positive mods as the result. Now, look for any mods that are impossible to pass. Since the result is a club, the dash continuous fire mod does not pass. Every other mod from the parent weapons are allowed to pass, so now it's really up to the game to decide what the result exactly becomes. As you can see, there are a lot of variables that go into the fusion system, making accurate predictions impossible. What we can predict is weapon class and type, fusion results in the same fusion group, and negative mods. Before we go into the actual tutorial for fusion, the last thing I want to bring up is weapon cloning. Cloning is not necessary for creating good weapons, but will become more useful the more advanced you become at fusion. While it is completely possible to create perfect weapons without fusion, it requires way more luck, resources, and weapon grinding. It's also not feasible to create a large category of perfect weapons without cloning. Cloning is using the Street Pass function of the 3DS to create weapon gems, or copies of a weapon. As you can guess, this is extremely useful as you do not lose resources after a fusion and can continually crank out stronger and stronger weapons. To clone, you need only one cartridge of Kid Icarus, but you will need 2 3DSs. Say you want to fuse 2 weapons together but don't want to lose them. Set one of the weapons as a gem on one of the 3DSs. Close the game and switch the card onto the other 3DS, and then set the gem of the other weapon there. From here, put both into sleep mode and have them street pass each other. You can open your 3DS and claim the first gem. Switch the game card again and collect the other gem. You effectively have copies of the weapons on your file now. Now all you need to do is go to the Fuse Gems menu, fuse the 2 pairs, and you have the result without sacrificing the originals. You should also fuse in the gem fusion screen, as it costs about half the hearts when compared to buying the weapon of the same value. Since you would have to buy 2 gems at full price and then fuse, the gem fusion screen is about 4 times cheaper. There are some limitations with cloning. The main drawback is how expensive it is. High value weapons can cost a high amount even when fused. You need to do a lot of heart farming to keep up. The most efficient way is probably Chapter 20 at 9.0 difficulty. A good run will take about 8 minutes and get you 90k hearts. To put that in perspective, a weapon at 300 value will take less than 50k to fuse, and a weapon at 340 value will cost above 100k. The other downside to weapon cloning is time. It takes 8 hours after a street pass for you to street pass with the same 3DS again. You are essentially limited to 3 fusions per day. This can be worked around by deleting one of the 3DS's system memory after a street pass. Unfortunately for me, I use my brother's 3DS to clone, so I just take the 8-hour delay. Now we are finally ready to begin the tutorial for fusing. The method that beginners use is what I call scrambling. That's when you take a random weapon and fuse it directly with another weapon to create a better weapon. This is simple, intuitive, and does not use an intermediate weapon, but you will never create truly good weapons by continually scrambling them together. A good analogy is to think of the fusion system as a Rubik's Cube. If you start in a scrambled position and keep scrambling, you will eventually get to a point that has a few clumps of color together. Likewise, fusing random weapon drops together can make a weapon that has some good things going for it, but you will never go beyond that. The first step to creating good weapons is through isolating modifiers. You need to choose what modifiers you want on your weapon first. I previously stated what mods are generally good on what weapons. For this example, we will make a cookie cutter weapon that most ranged weapons can use. It will have 6 range stars, 0 melee stars, be 299 value, and the mods it will have is shot range +3, shot homing +3, dash charge shot +4, and melee dash attack -2. Start by looking through all your weapons to find a ranged only weapon with shot range +3 on it. Chances are it comes with a bunch of other random mods on it too. You want to fuse it with weapons that drop off some of the random mods but keep the shot range modifier. Fusing with lower value weapons will drop the max potential value, making less mods pass. 100 value weapons are particularly useful since they massively drop the value and won't pass on unwanted mods. It takes several steps, but eventually you should have a single modifier isolated on your weapon. You should repeat this with all the mods you plan to use. Now would be a good time to bring up getting rid of stars on mixed weapons. I said there's no way to completely remove stars from a weapon once they are on. This is mostly true, but in extreme circumstances it is possible to completely remove stars from a weapon. This is only possible under very low value fusion, usually below 150. If you lack a mod on a ranged weapon, then you can theoretically isolate the mod on a mixed weapon and fuse the melee stars down to half a star, then get rid of the melee star altogether. Since the resources required is usually high, it's best to just farm weapons until you get the mod on a ranged only weapon. The only time this is useful is for getting negative mods from a mixed weapon to a ranged only weapon. Doing this for negative mods is even more difficult, but given how rare they are, you may not have a choice. With that out of the way, you should have all your modifiers isolated. The next step is to combine them. This part can be tricky. You want to check if any of them can combine initially. If they do, then you're lucky. If not, you should raise the value. The value of both mods added might exceed the limit, or you may have gotten an unfavorable fusion group. When raising the value, you look for fusions that increase the stars of the weapons or pass on high value mods. You should avoid lower value mods like random +1 and +2s. Look for overall defense +5 or higher, power attack, and item attack. Because the value of these are so high, they are less likely to pass in a fusion. In this stage of the process, you can also be flexible. Say you find a fusion that passes speed +4 onto your weapon. You can take that and use it as a potential substitute for one of the other mods. It can also be dropped later, but if you're happy with both scenarios, it just made the project a lot easier. There is not much else to say here, just check the results for all your weapons, look for desirable results, pick the best one, and fuse again. If you have trouble here, you may just need more weapons to have more results to pick from. Eventually, you should get a weapon that combines all the mods on a single weapon. Next is to put a negative mod on the weapon. Negative mods are rare, but allow you to add value to a weapon elsewhere that would be more useful. The initial mod will be on a random weapon, so like before, you will need to isolate it. Isolation can be tricky, since the mod will either always pass or never pass for whatever increment of value you are on. Either way, drop as many mods as you can, but you will most likely never be able to isolate a negative mod completely. There should always be at least one positive mod left over. After you partially isolate it, find a fusion that will pass on either a desired mod or a higher value mod. Once you have that, you can isolate the negative mod further by getting rid of the remaining unwanted mods and leaving only the one desired mod. From here, it is the same steps of raising the value and combining the desired mods with the weapon. The negative mod segment doesn't have to be a separate step in the fusion strategy. You can combine the weapons in whatever order you see fit. Once all the mods are combined onto a single weapon, you will have a completed outline. Depending on the choices made in the previous steps, it may look different from your initial goal, but that's more of a starting point than a concrete goal. The overall goal is to make a good weapon. From here, you may want to keep increasing the value to add on or max out your stars. This is done in the same way, but is a lot harder to have weapons that will increase the stars and keep all the mods passed too. You ended up randomly with one out of the 108 weapons, and you may have had a weapon in mind that you wanted as a result. The final step is to fuse the weapon you had into your desired weapon. Before going into that, it's worth mentioning a glitch that you may find interesting or useful. There is a glitch in the multiplayer mode called the switch glitch. It involves putting the mods and stars of one weapon onto another weapon. To activate it, you need to create two weapon sets next to each other in the select screen. One will have the weapon with the mods and stars that you want. The set next to it should have the weapon type that you want to play as. The mods and stars on that weapon do not matter. To activate the glitch, you hover over the set that has the mods and stars that you want to transfer. Then hit the D-pad in the direction of the other set, and then a few frames later, press start. If successful, you will enter the waiting room with the first weapon, but in the game you will have the second weapon, with the stats of the first weapon. You also end up with the power set of the first weapon. If you press start too early, you just end up with the first set, and too late, you end up with the second set. The window is lenient, but if you fail, you have to leave the room or play a game with whatever set you got. This is a temporary glitch, so the weapon goes back to normal after the game, and you will need to perform the glitch every time. Also, there is no way to do this in solo mode, only multiplayer. With that said, there are other cool advantages of this glitch that bypass weapon limitations. The weapons that can't have certain mods like clubs and continuous fire lose this limitation with this glitch. While a club with continuous fire is useless, the most applicable example is a Magnus club with shot range. The Magnus club with shot range actually does extend the range of its shots. Given the temporary and limited nature of the switch glitch, you probably will want to fuse your current weapon into your desired weapon. This is where fusion calculators come in handy. You can see what weapon will fuse with your current weapon to make your desired weapon. It may be impossible in just one step. For example, if your current weapon is a cannon and you wanted a club, you need to fuse the cannon into something else, like a claw first. With the correct class, there will be at least one weapon that fuses with your current one to create your desired one. In the calculator, you can put your desired weapon as the result, and your current weapon as one of the materials. The calculator will show all weapons that fuse with your current weapon to make the desired one. Here, it might be a good idea to switch the ordering from value-based to alphabetical order to see all possible options. If none of the weapons are good, you have two options. Fuse your current weapon into another one and try again, or try to create a higher value version of the other pair. At this point, I would pay attention to fusion groups. If your current weapon can be fused with a variable weapon into your desired weapon through fusion group 4, I would stick with that fusion. If there are no fusions that are in group 4, I would try to fuse your current weapon into another weapon that does. Group 5, and to a lesser extent group 3 can work, but you will most likely have the most success with group 4. Now you should have a potential variable weapon that fuses with your current weapon to make your desired weapon in group 4. The last step is to make that variable weapon. You can go back to the fusion calculator and set the variable weapon as the result weapon and leave the two material weapons blank. You can see every fusion pair that will make your desired weapon. You can theoretically chain this as many times as you see fit, but having a small chain will be less resource intensive and time consuming. The variable weapon should have high value and either desired mods that are planned to be on the final product or high value mods that are likely to pass. Another big problem you may run into is that you created the correct variable weapon, but the value is in a tier that makes the negative mod not pass. There is little you can do except start over. I recommend doing the eject cartridge trick here to restore your materials and try again. Once everything does line up, you should end up with your final product. It takes a ton of time, knowledge, and resources to create a good weapon, but it is extremely rewarding as an accomplishment and for the gameplay that comes with it. If you want to make another weapon, you can set a new goal weapon and repeat the process over again. It will be easier once you get accustomed to the steps and mechanics of the system. That said, this is basically as far as you can go in the fusion system without the use of cloning. Like I said, cloning can make things easier, but everything up to this point is possible with just one 3DS. The next portion will be the use of cloning to make precise weapons and high value weapons. The last part to cover is how to convert any weapon outline into the weapon type that you want with 100% certainty. This portion will involve the use of weapon cloning, but will give guaranteed results and works with any outline, even in higher values. Start by looking at fusion results of your outline with other weapons, for a result that makes the same outline. If there are none, then look at weapons that fused into the outline and see if there are any fusions that replicate those. The goal is to make the outline on a couple weapons. Usually an outline fused with itself in group 4 will give the same outline. Note that every weapon type fused with itself will be in group 2, so you can't just clone it and hope it will work. Once you made a few outlines on different weapons, they will hopefully each have the potential to make a few more to branch out. You should then write down all possible weapon type results that make your outline. Keep track of what weapon fuses with your outline to replicate itself, and the fusion group associated with that fusion. Now that you gave yourself plenty of options to work with, you can reverse engineer the path from the desired type. If you put your desired type in the fusion calculator and filter for fusion groups 4 and 5, you can see all the weapons that fuse to make the result. Look through them to find weapons that you already have or have the potential to make. The other weapon in that pair you should take note of, as if you have that weapon, then your weapon will be done. You can also put that weapon in as the result in the calculator to see if there are any successful paths. You want to keep branching out your existing options that you can make, as well as your theoretical options that will lead to your goal, until both ends finally link and you have your guaranteed fusion path. All that's left to do is to clone the weapons and fuse, and everything should work out. Here's an abridged example of a fusion path that I made for one of my weapons. I created this outline on a Great Reaper Palm that I wanted to transfer into an Aurum Club. The outline has 6 range stars, 0 melee stars, and is 334 value, and the mods are Shot Range plus 3, Shot Cancellation plus 1, Evasion plus 3, Dash Charge Shot plus 4, Full Health Boost plus 6, and Overall Defense minus 4. Looking at potential fusions, I found many ways to duplicate the outline, and could make a Compact Arm, Silver Bow, Aquarius Blade, and Drill Arm. Putting the Aurum Club into the calculator as the result, I could see what leads into the club through fusion groups 4 and 5. There were 3 promising paths. A Wolf Claw, which I have, fused with Artillery Claws could work, Stealth Claws and a Royal Blade works, and Guardian Orbitars and a Summit Staff work. Therefore, if I make the outline on Artillery Claws, Royal Blade, or a Summit Staff, I would get to my goal. Luckily, the Drill Arm could fuse with the Predator Cannon to make a Summit Staff, so I was able to complete the fusion chain and get to my goal result efficiently and deliberately. Fusing above 308 value is impossible, except with weapons that are already higher than 308. The only way to obtain weapons that high is to find them in the shop or from random weapon drops in high-intensity chapters. It will require many runs of a chapter at 9.0 difficulty to get weapons like that. Getting a good-sized catalog of high-value, ranged-only weapons is the first step to high-value fusion. You should also have fused several good cookie-cutter weapons in the 290 to 308 range. You need to fuse your high-value RNG weapon with your fused weapon to make a weapon that will land in the middle ground of high-level fusion, of around 310 to 320 value. You need to check all possible combinations and hope something works out. Again, to make this a sustainable process, you will need to fuse clones together to keep the rare, high-value weapons and cookie-cutter weapons after the fusion. If you still have nothing, there are some things you can do. One thing you can try is scrambling your very high-value weapons together to create one with less junk on it, or more desirable mods. If that still doesn't work, you can also do a more deliberate fusion by picking a high-value weapon with at least some good mods on it. Think of a weapon that can fuse with it and passes on the negative mod and can't pass on other mods. From here, think of a potential weapon that can fuse with it that will fulfill these criteria. We want to pass on the negative mod, limit the passing of unwanted mods, and fall below the potential max value. As an example, let's take a look at this theoretical weapon. This weapon will be the Viper Blade at 340 value, 4.5 range stars, and 0 melee, and the mods will be Overall Defense plus 5, Speed plus 4, Forward Dash Charge Shot plus 3, Side Dash Continuous Fire plus 4, and Full Health Boost plus 3. This weapon has some junk on it, but has a lot of potential. The goal of this exercise is to concoct a weapon that is possible to make, and fuses with this to make a good weapon above the 308 limit. The first step is choosing the negative mod. The goal of the negative mod is to block one of the mods on the 340 value weapon from passing. Our choices are Overall Defense minus 4, Speed minus 4, Dash Charge Shot minus 2, Dash Continuous Fire minus 2, and Self-Injury minus 3. Of these choices, I'd say Overall Defense minus 4 is probably the best one. Speed plus 4 is a good maxed mod that we would want to pass, so there's no reason to block it. There's also a better way of blocking out continuous fire mods. Dash Charge Shot and Full Health Boost can be blocked, but blocking the highest value mod is usually better for high value fusion. So we decided for the negative mod to be overall defense -4. Now we need to calculate what value ranges allow a negative mod to pass with the 340 value weapon. Using our equation, it should pass in the 304 to 300 range and the 294 to 290 range. You should aim to make your weapon as close to 308 as possible, so shoot for 304 to 300 value. This will also give you a max potential value of 322 to 320. Next, you should plan the weapon type the result should be. Since there is a continuous fire mod that is not optimal, the result should be a club to eliminate the chance of that mod passing. You should also aim for only fusion groups 4 and 5. The Stealth and Beam Claws fuse with the Viper in group 4, and the Bear and Artillery fuse in group 5 to make a club. So your intermediate weapon is to craft either Stealth, Beam, Bear, or Artillery Claws. We have cut out the possibility of 2 of the 5 mods from passing. Speed +4 is considered a good mod, so we want that mod to pass. Now we only have to worry about 2 more junk mods from passing. If you have Dash Charge Shot +4 and Full Health Boost +6 on your intermediate, and those pass, you eliminate the chance of the suboptimal mods from passing. So to recap, the intermediate weapon will be one of the 4 claws, and it will have Dash Charge Shot +4, Full Health Boost +6, and overall defense -4 on it. For now, we will assume full range stars, so the total value will be 233. We need to bump it up with additional mods to hit the 304 to 300 window. Before we fill in those mods, let's consider what the final weapon looks like. Right now, we plan to have Speed +4, Dash Charge Shot +4, and Full Health Boost +6 on it, as well as overall defense -4. Assuming full range stars again, the value of that would be 266. We need to get just below 320 to be safe. So, we need 2 mods that'll put both weapons in the appropriate value range and be good enough mods to be useful. Keep in mind the star rating can be lower to allow for some leniency. The 2 mods I came up with were Shot Range +3 and Freezing +4. The final intermediate should be a Claw with 304 value, 6 range stars, Freezing +4, Shot Range +3, Dash Charge Shot +4, Full Health Boost +6, and overall defense -4. Fuse that with the Viper Blade, and your projected end product should be a club at 320 value, 5 range stars, Freezing +4, Shot Range +3, Speed +4, Dash Charge Shot +4, Full Health Boost +6, and overall defense -4. Now that we know exactly what we are aiming for, we need to look back at the fusion groups and see if they still hold up. Since the intermediate has 4 positive mods, the 340 value weapon has 5 positive mods, and the projected result has 5 positive mods, the only group that will work is group 5. Group 4 can't pass 5 mods through the fusion, limiting the intermediate to the Bear and Artillery Claws. Note that there is no guarantee that the projected weapon is what will pop out. It can always prioritize the suboptimal mods on the 340 value weapon in favor of more stars. This is just a possibility and the best way to deliberately fuse a weapon to limit as much randomness as possible. I will say that I noticed the game tends to prioritize Dash Charge Shot over forward, side, and back Dash Charge Shot, if the value allows it, so your chances of success are higher than you think. Another thing to keep in mind is having a balance of mods passed from both weapons is best. If Speed +4 didn't pass, then it's more likely that one of the suboptimal mods does pass, which is something to be aware of during the planning stage. The basic steps here can be done for every fusion afterwards. Eventually you will be able to easily fuse weapons in the 320 range, then the 330 range, all the way up to 337. Like I said, 337 is the limit as negative mods can't pass higher, so building weapons in the 330 to 337 range is the absolute peak one can expect. Let's take a step back from the upper end limits of the fusion system and instead look at the lower limits. The lowest value a weapon can have is 100. If you force a negative mod that would set the value lower, then the negative mod won't pass no matter what. You can, however, make weapons just above 100 value that it still rounds down to 100 on the screen. This is accomplished by using starless mods. Negative mods on starless weapons are extremely rare, so you have to work with what you have. Once you have your negative mod, you fuse a positive mod with it that will equal the value taken away from the negative mod, plus a few decimal points. It can go over by however much you want, but if you want a clean 100 value result, then your options are stricter. The only other mods that should be on it are 2 continuous fire mods and shot range. You fuse that weapon with a 100 value weapon to create a Magnus Club. so the continuous fire mods and shot range mods can't pass. There are a bunch of cool combinations that you can make depending on what negative mod you use. There are very few boundaries that are left to be pushed. I have made min-maxed weapons at the 337 value range, 100 value weapons with mods, and melee and starless weapons at above 300 value. The question remains where to go from here. Obviously there are more outlines that can be made in the high value range, but that's expanding a boundary, not pushing it. From here, innovation is almost solely up to random drops. One possibility is what I like to call the 341 value singularity. 341 value weapons that are ranged only are very rare, but very important for the highest level of fusion. A 341 value weapon can fuse with another 341 value weapon to create a new 341 weapon. The amount of successful fusions is so low that you can't start a chain reaction. Eventually, if you get enough 341 weapons through drops, your pool and the amount of possible fusions will go up above a critical point, and you can continually crank out as many weapons as you want. Another thing that could happen is to inject positive mods in the 338 to 341 pool. As it is right now, the mods in that pool are almost all from random drops. If you want to add a desirable mod into the pool, you can slowly fuse the value of a mod higher and higher until it hits the right range. This process would be too slow and expensive right now, but the option is there if I deem it necessary for a particular project. The other huge breakthrough would be to get a negative mod on a ranged only weapon in the 338 to 341 range. A weapon like this is so rare that out of the thousands of weapons that have dropped, none of them fit this criteria. I only have 7 ranged only weapons at 341 from random drops, and 2 mixed weapons at 338 to 341 that have a negative mod on it. To get a weapon that meets both criteria would need crazy luck, and that's just for any random negative mod. Having a max negative mod that is viable would be insanely unlikely, yet the alternative is even less likely. If we obtain a 343 value ranged only weapon, then it can fuse with a 337 value weapon and pass the negative mod onward. Given there's only one confirmed 342 value weapon in existence, and it's a mixed weapon, I would not ever count this to happen. The last bit of RNG needed is for starless negative mods. I have plenty of them, and very good ones too, however there are a couple that still elude me. Namely, I'm looking for Imperial attack boost -4, speed -4, and most of all, overall defense -4. So that about covers everything about the fusion system that I know. While I give my final remarks, I want to showcase all the weapons that I have fused over the years. I didn't discover all the equations by myself. I used a lot of resources from the GameFAQs community, so a big shout out to them. By chance, if you are doing a fusion project and need some guidance, post your dilemma in the comments and I would be glad to help. Another thing about me you might know is that I play Smash Ultimate and have been going to tournaments in the tri-state area. If there's a tournament that you plan to attend and would like one of my weapons as a street pass, just comment and I will set it. I may also be going to some majors, so just let me know. A street pass gem that I would appreciate receiving is any ranged only weapon above 337 value or any starless negative mods. Again, I know this video is released way beyond the time where it will be relevant, but I just wanted to put out a resource that new players who pick this game up in the future can use, and showcase the internal mechanics of the game in an interesting and informative way. That should sum just about everything up. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know if you'd be interested in Smash Ultimate content like this. See ya!